support because of that broad context. So we got into this partnership around Tanzania Election Watch with the Center for Strategic Litigation in Tanzania, who are the host, actually, who did the conceptualization of the whole idea. And then it was brought to our attention together with the Kituo cha Katiba in Uganda, and together we agreed to stand in solidarity with our friends and also partners from Tanzania, because the context of Tanzania was really, really bad. The country denied, the government denied the accreditation to civil society. There were so many threats and also a lot of shrinking of space targeting not just the civil society, but also the opposition. And we are happy to see Comrade Tudulisu here because he really suffered in this situation. So Tanzania required an alternative platform which was supposed to help in the articulation of the issues and also documentation of what was happening in the country. And that's why we came up with a very big platform, which was led by our team of eminent African personalities, which was led by Professor Bebwa, who is here. And then we had the other members of that panel. And we also had our whole secretariat, which was running the affairs and other interventions. And I think at some point, Soila will tell us how we were structured around this. So this initiative, Tanzania Election Watch, became the platform now where we're able to get alternative voices and also speak to the world about what was happening in Tanzania, because Tanzania was completely closed from the outside world. That was from September 2020. And of course, informed by that, our partners in Uganda also found themselves in also related situations. And therefore, we were approached by Uganda civil society and also the member of the opposition to host a center, which also documented and also responded to the issues they were facing there. So in both countries, I think there was a lot of recession and also a lot of violations which were targeted to different stakeholders. And therefore, this forum is critical to enable us learn what we went through, what were the lessons, what were the achievements and the challenges. And that's why we also went through an evaluation process to give us an informed conversation. And this idea of evaluation also came from the meeting which we held in April last year in Naivasha among the members of the eminent team. And this was proposed as a way of learning in a more critical way about what we experienced. So we have Professor Collins Odote, who is going to be taking us through the findings and the recommendations. But we also see this as a platform for also the broad reflections on our experience, especially this idea of supporting our other countries which are going through challenges around elections. What does it mean to our partners within the region? So apart from Center for Strategic Litigation and the Kituo cha Katiba on Tanzania, when we went to Uganda in January last year, that initiative was mainly led by Kenya Human Rights Commission, Inuka Kenya, and also Journalists for Justice. And then we are working with civil society actors in Uganda, and of course, also with the members of the opposition. So I think one of the things we have also learned is in this kind of situations, it's very hard to separate the work of independent civil society from also partnership with the independent politicians. Because I think sometimes we try to draw a line between civic actors and the political actors, but these kind of situations forces us to work together as independent actors who want to guard democracy in our region. In Tanzania initiative, at some point, we also worked with PALU, who also pushed some of these issues which emerged to the AU mechanism. And I think it's also important to learn how that process went. We take this chance to appreciate the support we got from Open Society Foundation and also Open Society Initiative for East Africa, because they're the ones who supported this kind of work. And as you know, within our region, it's very hard to get partners who are willing to support political work of this nature. So I take this chance to welcome all of us and also hope we are going to have very candid and also insightful conversations. So before we go to the next level, allow me to invite Karibe and Soila to just briefly tell us how we were structured around the Tanzania and also around the Uganda initiative. So Annette, allow me to break protocol a bit so that we also get to understand how we were structured for us to be able to intervene on this kind of issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is Kawive there with you? Do we have Kawive? Kawive? Yes, so we will hear from Soila on what you experienced during the Tanzania election watch.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Irene Soila. Was the main lead of Tanzania Elections Watch Project and also Uganda, which was namely as African Election Watch. Our experience was really an important journey that we took, because it was indeed a moment to be there for your colleagues, for your friends, for the East African region, and also the African people at large. It is also important to say that the experience that we had in during the Tanzania elections and also Ugandan elections taught us that there's need for solidarity. There's need for a moment of always being there for your brothers and sisters in the African region, because there is a time that they cannot be able to speak for themselves, but you become the voice to speak for them that may not be able to speak for themselves. So indeed, the experience that we had it happened at a time when the Tanzanians could not even raise a voice. The Tanzanians could not even claim overflowed process. Anyone who tried to speak was threatened. I mean, we saw lots of violations in Tanzania. We saw lots of media gagging in Tanzania, and also just to say that lives were lost in the process and people were displaced in the process. That it was a fearing moment for the Tanzanians at the time. It also became so fearful for us, even when we were doing this from Kenya, that we felt like we were not so safe. It was not a secure moment for anyone. And that every time you are responding to the issues of concern, you feel like in the next minute or so, your life will be threatened, or you could actually be called by whichever space. Like in every moment, you even receive a call and you're asking yourself, could it be a call to take me to the next prison available? So basically, it was really a tense moment for everyone. But most importantly is to say that we were able to speak and also just, be available for the Tanzanians colleagues. And also at some level, they're also Ugandans. Very important, because from our own experience and for our own interventions, we were able to, to hold various processes accountable, including the African region, the international spaces, to come out and speak and protect, and also just give their views around the Tanzanian elections and how humanity was not at play during that time and the need to protect the people. So for us, it was a moment of speaking, a moment of solidarity, and a moment to say that in future, it could be the best. And even as we go for the Kenyan elections right now, we hope that our brothers and sisters from Tanzania and Uganda will also come forth and support the Kenyans, because we do not know what is awaiting us. But all in all, if they came and supported us, we could have more fair and peaceful elections in 2022 August.
Thank you so much, Soila and Davis, for context setting and also for sharing the experience during the Tanzania Elections Watch project implementation. So I'll invite at this point Edith Chibalama to also do her opening remarks. Edith, welcome. Is Edith with us? Edith, if you can hear us, please, the floor is yours. Okay, has Kawibe?
Yes.
Okay, Kawibe, you're welcome. 2 minutes to just give us your opening remarks.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be in this meeting. My name is Kawibe Wambua. I work with Inuka Kenya Nisisi. And during the process of the Uganda elections, we worked with the KHRC and partners in Uganda to assist or to ensure that we monitored the elections in that country. There are several things that we observed that we took note of. Number one, we quickly established a secretariat, what later came to be known as the African Elections Watch Center. And I'll later talk about African Elections Watch. But basically for us, there were 4 key things that emerged out of that observation. The number one thing was that it is not good for us to take governments, especially governments in the region, for granted or on their word, especially when they talk about the willful relinquishing of power, or either that relinquishing is through an electoral process which is free and fair. So they believe, I do not think that they believe in free and fair elections. That's what we discovered, that for Uganda, the lines were drawn in the sand, that it was clear that Museveni and his team were not willing to provide fair ground for everyone to participate in the elections. Number two is that even the best preparations for observation and for monitoring can actually be disabled by such forces. In Uganda, there are the likes of Anna Birete and others, and the institutions had developed even a monitoring, an e-monitoring center. But that e-monitoring center was, in the course of the observation, actually dismantled completely by the security forces in Uganda. The third lesson is that internal observers in a country have got or are likely to experience a number of problems in their work. This is because, for example, in Kenya, because we had set up this observation and monitoring center in Nairobi, and we were relying on observers and monitors that had been deployed by organizations that we are partnering with in Uganda. And they were supposed to send this information to us through a short code which was managed from Uganda, and even from our own emails and telephone accounts. But the information dried up. The monitors were either dismantled, or when the airwaves were closed in Uganda, when we are not able to get these messages across. So we had to devise other ways of getting the information. We had to devise on our feet, basically. On our feet, we have to get other ways of just getting that information out, even from newspapers, even from international reporters. So even the most elaborate in-country monitoring and observation systems can fall apart. Then, fourthly, the other thing is that the actors in the democratic space, the people who are keen on ensuring that elections go on very well, especially civil society actors and other institutions, can be targeted by the police force, in this particular case, the Uganda military, because we discovered in the process that there is a military, there is other formations within the military, and it's like the police is militarized. They can actually face personal threats to their lives and or threats to their operations. So it's important to create pathways for escape and pathways for saving these brothers and sisters when they face imminent danger in the countries. The last point I'm going to make is that the role of an African elections watch project or process is increasingly important in this continent, because we need an authoritative voice that speaks on the electoral environment in all the countries, or in any country that we are in Africa and even in the world, but one which is able or has the muscle to cover as many countries as possible, because solidarity is the only thing that is going to help us protect the civic space, and especially the political organizing space. The kind of brutality that was meted on the opposition and on individual persons and the disappearances have not fully been documented, because that documentation, or the people who were documented, were also personally attacked, the records destroyed and all that. So we have to get mechanisms of like operating behind the scenes in a war zone, being able to provide safe passages for people, for information, and for processes, especially reports that are developed as a result of the monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kawive, for that elaborate a discussion on the experiences during the TU project, that's the Tanzania Election Watch. And I think it's very important, because just summing up your conversation, you indicate that there's the importance of ensuring that we have the African Elections Watch, and also looking at issues of security, solidarity, and also documentation of the work that we do as civil society in terms of monitoring elections in different countries in the East Africa. So thank you so much. And I'm informed we have Edith Chibalama with us. So Edith, welcome. You have 10 minutes to do your welcoming remarks. Welcome, Edith.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I think most of my points have been made by Davis and Irene, but the point that I really wanted to come out is the uniqueness of the TU model. It was a unique and a new experience for KCK in particular as an implementing partner, because this was a model that was implemented virtually, without physical presence in Tanzania. So it meant that the usual limitations that are posed by national electoral laws and other security threats were actually circumvented. It also meant that, because we were working virtually, we had to adapt to new ways of using ICT. Coordination had to be in 3 different countries. So it also meant that us as implementing partners had to work closely and virtually. So it meant that a lot of coordination was virtual. The second point that I would like to make is basically about the structure of the TU. The TU panel, which was the face of this model, brought together very high profile people, very respectable individuals with established expertise relating to different aspects of elections. And for me, I think this makes the project stand out. And this is a team of people who virtually had to communicate, issue statements in the region, at AU level, and at international level. So for us as Kituo cha Katiba, this stuck out. And the other issue that I wanted to also underscore about the TU is the fact that it underscored credibility of information. So credibility of information was a key guiding principle. And this was important because then the findings of the panel, the work that was churned out, could not be discredited. So as Kituo cha Katiba, we believe that this is still a very promising model that can be still improved. And we are committed to learning from this particular forum webinar from other stakeholders in the region on how this can be better improved for purposes of replicating it in the region, but also beyond. So with those few comments, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you so much, Edith, and for highlighting the uniqueness that the Tanzania Election Watch presented. This is a project that was implemented during the COVID times. So again, there were also a lot of restrictions that came with the same, and this still stood out in terms of credibility of information, mobilization of key stakeholders, the eminent persons that took part in this project, including also the structure of TU. So thank you so much for highlighting that. We now move to the deep dive, what I would call the deep dive of this discussion today. And to sum it up, we engaged a consultant to do the evaluation of the Tanzania Election Watch project. And with us here today, we have Professor Collins Odote. And Professor Collins Odote is an associate dean at the Faculty of Law, University of Nairobi. He is an advocate of the High Court and also an expert on matters election and governance. So we will be giving him 20 minutes to present to us the findings and also recommendations from the Tanzania Election Watch project. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Annette, and good afternoon, everybody. As Annette has said, I had the privilege of evaluating the Tanzanian Election Watch project, and as part of that process, I've spoken to quite a number of people. So when I was listening to Edith and listening to David speak, they were echoing some of the things that they spoke about during the evaluations, and you will hear those recurring throughout the process. I think to start from the context of the conversations, I think as the name suggests, this was not an election observation mission. This was an election watch, and having conversations with the people who conceptualized the project. There's a deliberate reason why the name watch was chosen, because your traditional observation requires deployment of observers, requires accreditation, requires filing a report with the Electoral Commission. And because of the unique situation in Tanzania, not least because of COVID, but largely because of the restrictions that have been brought in by the regime then, which they registered several civil society organizations, which stopped people from observing the elections. So this was an innovation in terms of how best to deal with the political context and respond to the emerging issues, which was the basic focus of what the project's about. So as I speak about the findings, keep in mind that the major aim was largely to respond to the political context, a political context that was restrictive, a political context where there was human rights violations, but you then needed to speak out on and be able to provide solidarity, as Soila had said, to the developments in the country. as both Davis and Edith have spoken about, the project was implemented by the Kenya Human Rights Commission and Kituo cha Katiba, with the Center for Strategic Litigation playing a supportive role in the background. Again, because of its unique circumstances, while originally conceptualized by CSL in Tanzania, and had a whole conversation with Deus, the executive director of CSL, they could not be able to implement it themselves. Firstly, because of the security challenges, but secondly, because of the restrictions that were there in the country. In terms of structuring, I think Edith has already talked about the structure, and Davis to a little bit. The project was essentially structured into two. One, an eminent panel chaired by Professor Sempembo, who will be speaking later on today, and that was housed at Kituo cha Katiba. And secondly was the secretariat that was then supporting the work of the panel, which was then housed at KHRC. So again, an interesting dynamics in terms of how this worked. My responsibility was to take stock of the achievements and essentially to try and identify lessons for future programming. And I had Kawibe already speaking about what he thinks are some of those lessons in terms of the African election work, but I'll come back to that towards the end. So broadly, in terms of the findings, talking about the relevance of the project, I think it's important as you assess this project, and everybody that I spoke to ask them, did the project achieve what it set out to do? And everybody said, we think it achieved beyond what it set out to do. So that, which was an interesting question. I think why that is important to talk about is, despite all the other challenges that I will mention throughout the evaluation, the TWD final report was the only regional non-state initiative that looked into the Tanzanian elections. It's just 25 days to a Kenyan election, you will eventually hear a lot of observation missions. Even now, as we are speaking, there are long-term observers who have been in the country, issuing reports about the status of the elections, speaking to it, and then pointing out issues. Just last night, the media had a whole conversation, an hour and a half, with the chair of IEBC and the CEO, trying to point out shortcomings, trying to talk about the state of preparedness. That was not available in the process of Tanzania. So eventually all you had was the information from the people who are in charge of elections, the IEBC, in terms of saying this is how the elections were. So TW provided an opportunity to be able to speak to, and was the first that actually spoke about the elections. The only other reports that I've been able to see were reports from the ASA, Electoral Institute for Sustainability in Africa, the EAC, and then a few weeks ago by the Journalists for Justice, JFJ. So just four, but TW was the first and the most comprehensive, so provided an opportunity for that. So that for me, that stands out as a relevant issue. The second thing that stands out as a relevant in terms of relevance is the composition of the eminent persons, having Professor Sempembo, having Miriam, a former politician, having the CJ of Kenya. You can't hear me? Is it because the mic is too far from me? Let me try. Is that better? Having the retired CJ East Africa, having the colleague who helped midwife the Kenyan constitution. I think this made the statements that they were making extremely respected. So irrespective of what you think about what they said, the fact that this was coming from people who are respected in the region made it possible for people to be able to listen. So that's, I think, for me, is important. The last one, in terms of relevance, is that the project enabled an objective assessment of the 2020 elections, and thus provide international spotlight to an election which was extremely difficult. If anybody follows the situation in Tanzania, you knew by then, even during the COVID pandemic, we knew that there was COVID in Uganda, we knew that there was COVID in Tanzania, in Kenya, but in Tanzania, there was official reluctance to say that COVID existed. I remember being involved with some training, and Professor Ida Shivji could not actually be able to travel because he was down with COVID. We said, but officially in our government, there is no COVID, but I'm down with COVID. So that's the context within, I would think, this project was developed. So in terms of relevance, you cannot fault the project. The project was relevant in terms of its innovations, but also just the fact that there was a place where Tanzanians who are feeling locked up, who are feeling threatened, who are seeing their democracy receding, had somebody who could speak for them, had a voice in terms of spotlighting what was happening. Secondly, for me, I think one of the greatest, two of the greatest achievements, actually two or three, is number one is the fact that the project was able to voice and create awareness and therefore tell the world what was happening. And you had this happening not from Tanzanians, but you had this happening from other people across the region. So that's regional solidarity. The fact that you're able to have people from other countries saying, you know, what is happening in Tanzania concerns us, because if we're talking about regional integration, it cannot be only integration when we're talking about economic development. It must also be asking ourselves in terms of the status of governance, in terms of the quality of elections, and in terms of the credibility of those elections. So the speaking about those elections were critical. Secondly, I think the use of the eminent persons was important, not just because of the eminent, but because of what the eminence was able to do. They were able, and I confirmed this from the conversation, they were able to use their networks to reach out to the African Union, to reach out to the relevant UN bodies. One of the members of the eminent panel was actually appointed as a member, as a special rapporteur of the UN to demonstrate the kind of links that they were able to have and they were able to use. I was able to be referred to international media like Al Jazeera, relying on the regular reports that the panel was able to speak about. Fourthly, I think in the lack of physical engagement with Tanzania, the opportunity to communicate and engage with the media, including social media, I think was extremely useful to have situations where, although media was convened from Nairobi, they were able to have a conversation. You'd expect that when an election happens, when there's an observer mission, the observer mission will speak from Tanzania. Here was a situation where it was not possible to go to Tanzania. You had a media blackout, but that was able to be circumvented because from the lands of Kenya and Uganda, you had the eminent panel able to speak about Tanzania. I think the second, lastly, in terms of achievements for me, is the use of technology to observe elections and what that means in terms of future deployment of technology in observations. I think for a long time, we have been used to just two types of things. We've been used to having physical observation, and the place where we use technology is in terms of parallel vote tabulation, in terms of looking at the numbers, PVT, for those who know election observation. I think this is one of the instances where observation, including in terms of the quality of the elections, including the developments, relied purely on technology, demonstrating that I think the future of utilization of technology to carry out observation is extremely critical. I think it demonstrates that civil society were able to leverage on technology, which was brought in by the onset of COVID, and something that can be sustained into the future. In fact, one of the things that I've had conversations with the team is to ask, I hope that as Angaza is thinking of looking at the Kenyan election the next 25 days, they will not regress back to just doing things manually. They'll be able to do things also in terms of utilization of technology. Second, lastly for me, is the issue about security. I think the security situation, talking to the technology expert and the security expert, the fact that this happened without the security of monitors, without the security of the partners, without the security of the eminent persons being compromised, I think is a huge commendation for the civil society, a huge commendation for the people who are involved in the process because of the amount of effort they put in to ensure that there was no glitch, that they were able to have information relayed from Tanzania to Kenya, and this information was able to be used. I think in terms of achievements for me, the last issue in terms of achievements is the ability to partner on a regional level to monitor elections and to partner from different countries. A lot of the times we have an organization that goes to have a physical presence. So you have your KHRC going to Tanzania, setting base there and sitting for 3 months and doing the observation. Here, people were able to observe from where they are. But also, a lot of the times as civil society, we spend a lot of energy in terms of competing with each other. To have regional collaboration, to have CSL in Tanzania, working with KHRC in Uganda, in Kenya, and working with KCK in Uganda, I think for me is a huge achievement, something that as we think about initiatives moving forward, something that should be thought about. Having spoken about achievements, there are several missed opportunities in my and two for me stand out. The first missed opportunity that stands out, I have pressed technology. But if you speak to everybody, you know that technology was underutilized. I remember having a conversation with Davis and asking Davis, so what is the difference between you and IEBC? We complain to IEBC that, you know, you have technology that becomes redundant, that is rarely used. Yes, the software was procured, but it's used to collect data. It's used to verify the results. It's used to provide real-time updates. Was, to be honest, I think close to 25%. In fact, I am not sure that the people at KHRC know that it was handed over back to them by the developer. Yet the developer confirms to me that he did hand it over. In fact, he was showing me the email where I sent it. But the person who was supposed to receive it, when I spoke with them, said, Prof, I don't even remember it was handed over to me. What that confirms is that that technology is not being used for future elections. It was not used for Uganda. It was not used for Kenya. Yet huge investments were put into it. For me, that's, I think, a huge missed opportunity, because we ran the risk of either going back to our manual observation that we know, or secondly, expending much more resources in terms of using future technology. Speaking about at the end, some of the things I think would have been done differently to use that technology. The second is the lack of citizen engagement and engagement with the political players, including the opposition. Tundu is here and is going to be speaking himself. But I think as the process went on, the element in which the citizens of Tanzania were socialized, were mobilized, were engaged in this process, the extent to which the political class was engaged in this process, so that they can also be able to reinforce some of the findings coming in, what I think are missed opportunity, and some that if we think about future, those three things I think need to be addressed moving into the future. For the future, I think the two lessons that for me stand out is in terms of, as you design, thinking about the quality of the panel that you speak to. So it's not just about the technical information that you get, but also that how information that gets used. I think the eminence of the panel is something that needs to be kept and something that needs to be thought about. How do you get an eminent panel? But as you get it, you need to deploy it in such a way that they don't feel overworked. They don't feel that to an extent that they're doing work that's actually technical. And I'm speaking about that towards the end. The second that is important is the utility of social media. Social media became a source of information, but also a tool for communicating, a tool for circumventing restrictions. And I think something that needs to be thought about much more into the future in terms of how do we deploy it much more in terms, especially in regimes that are restrictive. But as you deploy it, also keep in mind that internet can be shut down. So how do you ensure that you operate in a manner that even that happens? It is circumvented. Part of the reasons why we carry out observation is to help contribute to credible elections. So one may ask, so what progress did this project contribute to free and fair elections? I think the reality is that the quality of the elections in 2020 was challenging. To have an election where one political party gets close to 90%, to have an election where the opposition performs as they did, to have an election where one of the major presidential candidates has difficulty even campaigning, cannot be anything close to free and fair. But this was due to the tyrannical nature of the leadership of the Tanzanian government then. The question is, was this a limitation of the project or a reality of the context? What could the project have done differently? This will continue being a lingering question, but I think if you appreciate the context of Tanzania, you will realize that I think just even spotlighting the issue, just even making the issue a point of not just regional, but international conversations, having the issue and reach the UN, I think for me, that was already a success and a lesson for civil society that you cannot expect to solve all the problems. But I think to make a contribution to the process is also useful enough. But also even in terms of design, think about, so what's the limit? And I like the fact that by design, they said we were watching the elections. We were not observing. So we're contributing to a conversation in terms of the emerging issues. In terms of just a little internal issues, in terms of efficiencies, despite the fact that the project made huge achievements, there were several inefficiencies and bottlenecks. Funds, for example, were received after the project commenced, which affected the delivery of the activities. The disbursement and procurements were extremely problematic. And I think part of the problematic nature was, I think, the the relationship between the different institutions, I think, required much more clarity in terms of who makes what responsibility. You are given instances where somebody says, let's use X. The other one says, no, we need to procure. You are given instances where, for example, the secretariat almost went on strike because of delay in their payments. And I think those kind of things hampers effectiveness of a project. So I think for organizations that are involved in this kind of thing, it's important to appreciate several things. One, it's important to appreciate that when you have a project which is a rapid response, you must design it as a rapid response and clarify the procedures so that it becomes much more efficient. But secondly, when you have a project that involves 3 organizations, it's critical that representatives of those 3 organizations speak much more. I got the feeling that in the one instance, you had KHRC that was implementing it and saying, these are the rules. And then you had CSL saying, but you are obstructing our project from going on. I think that then, as opposed to helping us build onto something for the future, leaves you with sour taste at the back of your mind. You can, for example, see that we have representation from the project implementers, or we don't have representation from the people who are involved in conceptualizing the project. And I think that for me just speaks to some of the undercurrents that I think require to be dealt with moving into the future. So for me, that's a huge issue. The second huge issue that I think is important in terms of efficiency is worrying about how we get credible staff to support that kind of process. I think I had conversations with the eminent panel where they say, we got documents from the rapporteur that we could not use. We had to work around it again. So I think thinking about that, please ensure that when you have entities that have different responsibilities, they work to each other. And when you have a project that is housed at several places, the Secretariat house at KHRC and the panel house at Uganda, I think the linkages between KHRC and KCK needs to be strengthened. So the 2 parts speak as 2 parts of one project and not as 2 separate projects. I think in terms of efficiency, those for me were weaknesses that could have been dealt with much. In addition, I think media and communication, I think having a much more robust, yes, there were media people, there were communication team, but having a much more robust media strategy that helps you to sustain the engagement, that helps to ensure that you have media briefs that are shared in different media outlets, I think would then help ensure that the credibility of the outputs are then addressed. At the end, though, I think despite those challenges, I think TEW became a reliable source of information for Tanzanian elections. The reports generated were cited by international media and continues to be a credible point of reference for conversations into the future. In terms of sustainability, I think 3 things that I would like to say. Number 1, the non-replication of the project in Kenya, I think is something that the teams need to think about. Yes, by design, the hope was that it would work in Uganda. It did to an extent. It would have been hoped to work in Kenya, and especially for the Kenyans in this room. There's a huge challenge that we are happy to work in other countries, but then when it comes to ours, it becomes a different. That's something I think requires to be assessed to ensure that moving into the future, that project is able to work for the region and not just some parts of the region. I think the failure of the technology to be deployed, the technology that was procured, limits the sustainability of the project. It is important, though, that this project does not become a one-off. It should actually be something that works much more into the future, and that becomes a consortia for election observation and for election monitoring in the region. To do so, I think there are some levels of adjustments that are required. I think the first level of adjustment is if you have a secretariat that is formed and then disbanded after the elections, then the person who holds the project then disappears. So it's important that the people who are like the anchors of that project become permanent, so that you have a core group of people who are thinking and who are conceptualizing this project and thinking about it into the future. That's, I think, is a critical issue. Even as you do so, we must avoid the tendency of converting networks into organizations. So I don't think that if you think about it, it should be an organization of its own. It should be an entity that is brought together by organizations that exist on their own, and that you can even have a secretariat that rotates. In one instance, it is housed at KHRC, the next time it is housed at CSL, the next time it's housed at KCK. So that is that leveraging on the hardware and on the institutional memory of the different institutions. The second is that you do so, it's important that you develop procedures that enable you to have to have a process that is for different entities across the region. Finally, and I hope I'm not taking too much time on it, in terms of key lessons, I think the key lessons that arise out of this project demonstrates that CSOs can and should adopt new ways of election monitoring and observation. I think the use of technology to monitor elections, the innovations to monitor elections outside the country, I think was useful. I think it's important though to dedicate sufficient time in terms of fundraising. I think part of the reasons why the Kenyan has not worked because of lack of resources, to dedicate sufficient time in terms of fundraising, to start early. And if you want to deploy technology, it's important that you have within the secretariat staff who are competent in the utilization of technology. I think one of the challenges is that, yes, you hired somebody in charge of technology, but within the secretariat, you did not have the counterpart who knew how that technology works and who can take it forward. So yes, it's been developed, but now it sits and nobody can use it unless you go back to that kind of the person who did it later on. Second, lastly, I think the linkages by CSOs within the region is important. We have the East African Civil Society Forum, but I think it focuses largely on regional integration. To have greater linkages among CSOs who work on governance, who work things around election observation, so we can share experiences, so there can be greater solidarity, and then so there can be joint initiative is extremely useful in the future. But as we think about the project, and Kawive spoke about the African Election Watch, I think it is okay to dream about an African Election Watch, but I think we should start incrementally. And I think one of the first useful ideas would be to start within the region, within the ESC. You now have, with the joining of DRC, 7 countries. I think and because we have our linkages to the ESC as a framework, to start within the context of the ESC will be much more useful at being ambitious to have it across the entire continent. So that's, I think, for me, I think something that I think you can be able to think about. Lastly, I think in terms of my open assessment, the project was innovative, was responsive, and despite the very limited citizens' engagement, contributed immensely to spotlighting processes of the Tanzanian elections and providing information on its quality and lessons for regional engagement. My urge to colleagues in KHRC and Tangaza is that although you've not been able to have a regional process replicating TW, I think it is not too late to reach out to your colleagues in Uganda and Tanzania to see how best they can be involved in the processes that you are engaged in, especially with the use of technology. Some of the engagements can be engagements that are very less costly. So that we don't say at the end, I know for Kenya, they were not able to be involved because we've been able to do Tanzania, we've been able to do Uganda. If you really want to go towards a regional monitoring process, it is not too late to bring in colleagues from Uganda and Tanzania to be able to have regional solidarity. You may actually need it, depending on how close this election look. Thank you very much, Annette. I'm sorry I may have gone overboard in terms of time.
Thank you so much, Prof, for that elaborate presentation on the findings and also the recommendation. We've had a lot of achievements, about 6 of them outlined, missed opportunities as well. We have those, about 2, and also lessons, 5 of them. And I know, colleagues, you've been taking note of this. I think importantly, you've talked about sustainability of this initiative. And I know colleagues here and the participants will take note of this and consider taking this to the next level. So thank you so much. So we are now going to be speaking, to be hearing from the speakers. And in the interest of time, I'll just be introducing our first speaker. So our first speaker is a Tanzanian lawyer, Chadema politician, former member of parliament for Singida East constituency since 2010, and also Chadema's presidential candidate during the 2022 general elections. He's held so many positions, including being the former president of Tanganyika Law Society, chief legal officer for Tanzania. And for me, what stands out on his bio is that He is a fierce opposition figure and outspoken government critic. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Tundu Lissu, who will be talking to us about his experiences as being an opposition leader in the East Africa, particularly to be specific in the country of Tanzania. Welcome, Tundu Lissu.
Many thanks, the moderator, and please allow me to express my gratitude for the invitation to share my views on this important subject. Please also allow me to recognize the eminent presence of some of our most illustrious sons and daughters of East Africa. And I have in mind here Professor Freddie Sempebwa, Dr. Miriam Matembe, my good friend Collins. We've been fighting these battles from when we were still young people. We now have some gray beards like myself. Yeah, I'm so happy to see you all, especially Professor Sempebwa na Mama Miriam Matembe. You have been an inspiration to we young ones, and thank you for the inspiration. I have not seen Chief Justice Willie Mutunga, but I believe you will also convey my fraternal greetings to him. He has also been at the forefront of the democratic struggles in our region for decades. And he has been a major inspiration to me personally, and I believe to many of us. I think it will be remiss if I did not also express my gratitude to all of you who constituted yourselves into the Tanzania Elections Watch to try and make sense of the 2020 general elections. It's always very difficult for me and for my people to call what happened in 2020 an election. I have participated in all multi-party elections in Tanzania since the reintroduction of multi-party politics in the early 90s. I have participated both as a citizen, as a candidate, as well as a legal practitioner in the numerous election petitions that have been fought in the courts of law since at least the year 2000, since the 2000 general election. So I think it is fair to say I have some knowledge of Tanzanian elections. And what I saw and what we experienced in 2020, we find, and I personally find difficult to call it an election. It is it is important, I believe it is important to underscore the fact that what we know of the documentation of what happened in 2020 was thanks to you who organized yourselves into Tanzania Elections Watch. The not free, not fair report that you produced is, in my estimation, the most important election observation report to come out of our general elections since at least 1995. And I don't say that because you are here and I'm trying to flatter you. I'm not trying to be cheerful. What I say is the TEW report is the most important election observation report that I have seen coming out of a Tanzanian general election. And I'm someone who has read and analyzed a lot of election observation reports since 1995. So that report is very important, and congratulations to all of you for a job very well done. Now, you have tasked me with sharing my experiences of the 2020 general elections. I hope you will forgive me if you allow me to disappoint you. I hope I'll be forgiven by you good people. I think what happened to me as a presidential candidate, and to many other parliamentary, especially parliamentary and council candidates of the opposition across the country, is generally very well captured by the not free, not fair report. Your report has generally captured the essence of what happened. It will therefore be unproductive on my part to repeat a story that I think, if you have read the not free and not fair report, the story that you know very well. If you have not read the report, I respectfully invite you to read that important report. It tells you truthfully and in a summarized form. The story is very long, but it tells it in a summary form of what happened in the 2020 elections. So instead of repeating what has been so very well documented by the TEW report, please allow me to use the little time that I have to speak about what I think are important issues that are not adequately captured in the TEW report, if at all. If at all. I think that is more important, especially now that we are talking of constitutional reform, now that we are talking of electoral reforms in Tanzania. For your information, for about a month now, my party leaders have been engaged in discussions with the government and the ruling party in Dar es Salaam about what needs to be done so that we don't repeat the terrible lessons of 2020. So it is important to raise issues that are not adequately captured in the TEW report so that they help to focus our minds on what needs to be done going forward. So what are these issues that are not captured in the TEW report? Reading the report, it very well raises the important institutional and constitutional points or issues which have been the bane of Tanzanian elections, Tanzanian multi-party elections, at least since the reintroduction of multi-party system in 1992. Namely, that Tanzania doesn't have an independent electoral machinery, that the Electoral Commission, that the National Electoral Commission is an extension. In fact, it is one of the least reformed institutions which we inherited from the era of one-party rule. The commission is totally dominated by the president, and the Tanzanian president has always been firstly TANU, and since 1977 as CCM chairman, or now chairwoman. The fact that the commission is dominated by the president has been a constant feature of our electoral system since at least 1965. And therefore, and the year 65 is the year when, for the first time, we became a formal one-party state. The commission has retained the same structure as it did in 1965. It's totally dominated by the president. The machinery below the commission, those who actually do the business of conducting elections, the returning officers, presiding officers, and the people below them, that entire machinery is, as has always been the case, dominated by the government and by our constitution and laws. Any and all civil servant is appointee directly of the president, or if not directly appointed by the president, they are appointed on behalf of the president. And the president retains ultimate disciplinary powers over all civil servants. Now, that is the machinery that runs our elections in Tanzania, and it has remained that way at least since independence. In fact, that is what the machinery that we inherited during from colonial rule. I'm sorry. Now, the TEW captures that fairly well in my view, that the Electoral Commission is the electoral machinery is not impartial. And because it is not impartial, it is literally impossible for it to conduct free, fair, and credible elections. But that is only part of the problem. I think the problem that is not touched at all in the report is the institutional rigging. The institutional rigging that is committed way before the elections are even proclaimed. And this is where I want to put my emphasis on. What does it mean? What does it mean to have a commission appointed by the president, which, and I will read I will refer to the Constitution here. What does it mean to have a constitution which is mandated to demarcate constituencies under a criteria described in the Constitution, stipulated by the Constitution, that when it is demarcating constituencies, the Electoral Commission is required to consider availability of the means of communication and geographical conditions of the areas. Those are the only criteria that our Constitution, the Constitution, stipulates as the criteria that the Commission should look at when it is demarcating the country into electoral constituencies. Parliament is supposed to be a representative organ, a representative organ of the people. But our Constitution does not stipulate population, the number of people, as being a criteria or one of the as being a criterion or one of the criteria for demarcating electoral constituencies. All that it says is the Commission should look into the means of communication and geographical conditions, not the number of people. What does that mean in practice? What does that mean in practice when it comes to our elections? The Constitution also stipulates that when it is discharging its mandate to demarcate the country into constituencies, the Electoral Commission must obtain the consent of the president. In other words, the Constitution can only demarcate the country into constituencies upon the approval of the president. Therefore, it is the president who determines the size of parliament. And in fact, I would add, it is the president also who determines the composition of that parliament. Now, I will explain the practical effect of these provisions. For the general elections 2020, there were 264 parliamentary seats being contested. I'm talking here about the parliamentary election. The presidential election is, we will need another event like this one, I believe. So there were 264 constituencies countrywide. And the number of registered voters the number of registered voters, according to the figures given by the commission, was 29 million, roughly 29 million, 29.2 million or thereabout. And those voters, those 29 million voters, were divided up amongst those 234 constituencies. Now, if you analyze the distribution of voters in those constituencies, you immediately begin to see a clear pattern which has serious ramifications on the outcome of the election. Number one, taking the example of mainland Tanzania. Mainland Tanzania.
Excuse me, Tundu.
Yes, please.
5 more minutes, please.
Oh my God. Oh my. Okay. What can I do in 5 minutes? Number one, let me try. You have a very serious problem of malapportionment of constituencies between regions of the country which are more densely populated and those which are more sparsely populated. And I have some figures that I don't know if I will be able to give them all in 5 minutes. But taking the example of the 2020 general election, the 10 highest densely populated regions of Tanzania, which accounted for 55% of the total number of registered voters, accounted for about 44% of the parliamentary seats. The remaining 16 regions, with a population of 45%, had 56% of the total number of constituencies. So you have a clear case of a representation of sparsely populated areas and a gross underrepresentation of densely populated regions. And you know what? The opposition, if you look at our elections since 1995, the opposition has always done very well in densely populated regions of Tanzania. Number two, looking at the same figures, you notice immediately a very clear case of a rural bias in demarcating constituencies. And I will give you just one example of Dar es Salaam. Dar es Salaam is the most densely populated region in Tanzania, and it is our largest city, with 3.4 million registered voters in 2020. Now, 6 least populated regions of the country, the lowest 6, also had a total population of 3.4 million registered voters. However, in demarcating constituencies, Dar es Salaam was assigned a total of 10 constituencies, while those 6 regions with the same combined population had 37 constituencies. If you look at the other cities like Mwanza or Arusha or Mbeya or Tanga, the same pattern is evident. And these major urban centers of Tanzania is where, at least since 2010, the opposition has been the strongest. So you have a clear case, a very clear case of underrepresentation of urban voters and overrepresentation of rural voters. And in practical terms, that affects the performance of the opposition. Now, Zanzibar is a separate case altogether. According to the commission, Zanzibar had about 128,000 registered voters. It had 50 constituencies. On average, one constituency in Zanzibar had 2,576 registered voters, while the national average for the 2020 elections was 135,000 registered voters. Now that has to do with the history of our union and the attempts to bribe Zanzibaris with political positions in order to silence them and to silence their demands for autonomy. But it is an intolerable case of overrepresentation which affects the quality, the integrity, and the integrity of our elections. Now, these are some of the issues that I think the TEW report should have looked at the same time. And I say this precise for the simple reason that they have appeared fairly consistently in the election observation reports, particularly of the EU since at least the year 2000. The EU observer missions in the country's general elections have repeatedly called this phenomenon in question over the years. And one had hoped that the Tanzania Elections Watch would have taken a closer look at this problem, because it is not just the last 3 months of the election period that are important. What happens even before the election is called is just as, if not more, important. And with these few thoughts, I thank you for listening. And I once again thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Tindulisu, for those powerful insights on some of the gaps that the TW report really did not capture. And I think at this point, I would just want to request that you share with us a write-up so that the same can go out. We will ensure that the participants get the same and also put that information to good use. So before I invite the next speaker, I would just like to encourage us to join this conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #MulikaKura, and also engage us on our on the chat box. We will have a plenary session where we'll get to your questions and even comments to the different speakers to respond to. I would also want to acknowledge the presence of Zain Abubakar and also Betty Murungi. Both are members of the TU panel of eminent persons. Welcome to today's webinar. We are happy to have you. So the next speaker and will be taking us through the topic on democratic trends in the East Africa and the implication of the same for the civil society, who are the oversight groups, the watchdogs. So our next speaker is Honorable Dr. Miriam Matembe. I know she's known to most of us, but just a brief bio of who she is. She is a strong proponent for and an advocate of women's rights in Uganda. Dr. Miriam has also was previously, she was a member of parliament, a women member of parliament representing Mbarara district, that's in Uganda. She was a minister for ethics and integrity in the government of Uganda also. And She also became a member of the Pan-African Parliament representing Uganda. And importantly as well, she was one of those members, sorry about that. Yes, she a member of the Uganda Constitutional Commission, known as Odiko Commission. I would like to hear what the Odiko Commission really was all about, Dr. Miria. And she also, she was one of the experts from Uganda and Kenya, from experts from Uganda that reviewed and made proposals on the proposed constitution of Uganda and presented their findings to the Warioba Committee in 2015. Thank you so much, Dr. Miria, for joining us this afternoon. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes to just take us through some of the trends, democratic trends in East Africa and what that means for the civil society organizations. Welcome.
Thank you very much, my dear. I had thought that you'd call my senior of the seniorist, Professor Sempe, who had been my lecturer, my colleague on the Constitution, and my senior in everything, so that I could fill in the remaining. But now, since you have called me, we shall have him to fill in the gaps and then summarize what will come out. Yeah, I want to thank you for constituting this panel to discuss this matter. It has been quite long since we left Naivasha, and I had thought that we've lost it, but now that we are back, I have hope that we shall get something. We can remove it. I don't know what are you doing. Okay, I want to thank you for inviting me. I think you are putting that presentation, but maybe you don't have to put it because I'm not going to follow it. I wrote it down because I know you would need some of my notes which I will speak, but given the short time, I will just go through some of the things very fast. I am so happy to see Tundulisu. So I'm happy to see you. In fact, as I listened to you, I thought, why don't they leave him to speak so that for us, we have already spoken. I want to thank you for what you have said, but first I want to thank God for you that you are still alive. I mean, we praise the Lord. God has plans for all of us. And even we that we are still alive after COVID, that means we still have battles to fight and we shall continue, God being our helper. Now, the topic which you gave us is democratic trends in East Africa. And I just want to summarize the things which I wrote there. There are quite many, but listening to Tundu and listening to whoever has spoken, I mean, what more do I add on? I will just be summarizing. If you ask me to talk about the democratic trend in East Africa, I will say that looking back in the early, I think it was like late 80s up to early 90s, there was such a great hope, enthusiasm, and looking forward with excitement of the new breed of leaders who had come on board, that they were going to change the democratic trend of Africa so that we also move into real democracy. But unfortunately, having listened to all of you, I mean, it is clear what we have to say. It is clear that that is no more. It is clear that this has changed and democratic trends in East Africa have been moving towards the downhill instead of upward. And for some countries such as Uganda and Tanzania, as you have heard, it's come to the bottom of the foot of the hill. For me, I say things as I see them. The democratic path in East Africa is no longer driven by the tenets of democracy, which include, a system for choosing and replacing the government through free and fair elections, free and active participation of the people as citizens in politics and civic space, protection of the human rights of all citizens, and the rule of law and transparency and accountability. We all know that when we are talking of democratic governance, you see, you examine those values which I have given you as tenets of democracy, and then you give marks. For me, as I talk right now, I want to say that within the East African region, just varying differences and types of nature of violation, but doing a similar thing. I want to say that the democratic path in East Africa is now rather governed by militarization of politics. It's all about military. You heard what Tundu Lissu said, that you could not appropriately call it elections, but war. For me, I call it elections at gunpoint. And that's what it was in Uganda and in Tanzania. Therefore, militarization, for us, even in Uganda here, even when it is just a mere constituency, even a district chairperson, military, they all go, and that's all you see. Now, two, self-aggrandizement. Leadership in Africa is no longer driven by such at all. Political leadership is driven by materialism, self-aggrandizement. What do I get out of it? And that's it. And therefore, it does not matter who goes there. It is just self-centeredness. Another one is commercialization of elections. It is about money. In politics in East Africa, particularly in Uganda, where I will bring out more evidence, it is just voter purchase, voter purchase. Incidentally, I participated in the last elections because they introduced the senior citizens representation. And since I've been pained and hurt by the way senior citizens are suffering in this country, grabbing of land, beating, and that kind of thing, I thought I would go there and be their voice. But I think God had taken me there to see elections at purchase. For me, it was bulk purchase, where you collect people and pay them as much as you can, even in the presence of the candidate, and the electoral commission is watching. So it is about commercialization. It is the more you have, the more chances of becoming a political leader in the country. And of course, that is followed by ethnicity and tribalism. Because the moment your tribe goes there, your tribe leader is there, then you are in business. If your ethnicity has a one, then you know what comes on. And all these things are everywhere. I'm saying this is overall in East Africa. And I don't think anybody can question it because I've listened to others and I have seen what has been happening. I observed Tanzania. Virtually, I was one of the senior people, eminent people, and I saw Uganda and I've been seeing it for so much. And I know Kenya, incidentally, being a woman activist, I've been participating in all these, even making of the constitutions and so on. And by the way, I'm very excited these days to see, but don't think I'm biased, to see Madam Martha Karua. At least I'm saying for the first time, Kenya to have at least a woman at that high level, it would give me joy. But otherwise, I'm not biased, but I must express my interest also when it comes to gender. Now, having said this as a summary, I want to bring it to Uganda to give you some of the things that happened really. The government of President Museveni, which has been in power for the last 36 years, has never, and I'm saying it because I know I participated in it, and I abandoned it, and I know it has never liked multi-party democracy. And although the ban on political parties, which had been there for over 20 years, was removed in 2006, the environment under which elections have continued to be held has been very hostile, very hostile. This environment has been disenabling to political positions or political parties who are always perceived as enemies of the state deserving persecution. For us here in Uganda, it is clear. You are opposition, you are enemy of the state. You are enemy. Opposition is enemy against the state, and therefore you should be persecuted. The political parties have not had an opportunity to peacefully mobilize, recruit members, and build their parties into viable institutions that can freely and fairly compete in elections with President Museveni's NRI. Moreover, which is also dictatorial because it is the one-person thing. Now, during the elections of 2006, 2011, 2016, the presidential candidates and their supporters, the opposition presidential candidates and their supporters have always been persecuted, arrested, detained, and some killed. Their rallies are always dispersed with tear gas and other forms of violence with impunity. However, the 2021 elections were the worst. After Tanzania, after we had observed Tanzania, I don't know which to weigh better with the other or they are equal. In Tanzania, of course, I was not there physically. In Uganda, I was physically seeing everything. To the extent that, by the way, the president declared it, yes, I'm the one who have arrested those people, and yet we looked for them, we couldn't find where they are. It is so terrible. So the 21 elections were the worst. We saw open, shameless military and police brutality, and listed two main opposition candidates, NUP and FDC. I think Chagrani was supposed to be on this Zoom, but I don't see him. With their supporters, which made the electoral process look more of war than elections. Me, I call Uganda's elections that they were elections at gunpoint. They were not elections. They were voter purchase, probably at gunpoint. And I saw right now in Uganda, there's clear evidence of capture of the voice of the people, fearful to challenge the state. Ugandans are now shut down. They are so fearful to talk even when something is really clearly wrong. CSOs are under capture. Some of them are compromised. And those who shout, like myself, Citizens Coalition for Electoral Democracy, must be shut down. The licenses have been taken off from us, and therefore the remaining organizations, they just keep quiet, and all they can do is you do your own business in service delivery. But anything to question governance, no, that is not your area. So they are all threatened, silenced by the government with threats of revocation and shut down. And of course, there was denial of accreditation. Many of the organizations which usually deal with the observation of elections were denied accreditation, no reason given. And even those who were given accreditation down the road, they were closed down, they were arrested, and I had to go to police to rescue the women who were observing elections because they were arrested, and some of them spent days in prisons until we went and got them down. So you can see the supporters of all these people, the organizations were being arrested, unlawful detention, enforced disappearance. So all these things took place. The opposition members were denied peaceful campaigns, as many were arrested, such as Honorable Chagrani of North and Honorable Amuria. The rallies were just wars, that was all. Very clear and open and not hidden. There was capture of institutions responsible for elections. You talk, Mr. Tundu. At least for you are saying that the Electoral Commission does not have constitutional power. But even ours here where it has constitutional power, practical powers, forget, they are not there. You may cry and amend your constitution and get constitutional powers, but you will not have the physical powers to use. Judiciary and parliament, in Uganda it is now one person at play. All institutions captured, it is one person's order. The members of parliament bow down and then they are about patches, it is all about patches. So, in Tanzania also, what was happening, I think, is no different from us. And I want to say that right now, the capture of civil society organizations and silence of the civil society and citizens of Uganda will certainly curtail the extension of election observation and reporting that NGOs usually undertake to inform their reports. If things continue the way they are, for me in Uganda, I'm telling you, I have my professor here to bear witness. If things continue like this in Uganda, I really don't know what we can do, because election violence is characterized by a large portion of the election process, especially during the election campaigns. In fact, if you want to know, in 2021, on 18 to 19, 54 Ugandans, including men and women, were killed, openly killed by security agencies following the riots that resulted from the detention of Honorable Robert Sentamu Kyagulanyi. When their candidate was detained, people went on the street to demonstrate. 54 immediately were killed, and the president said, yes, I killed them because they were doing wrong. And some of them, to date, there has been not any accountability by the state of these deaths. Others were kidnapped, others were taken to detention and gazetted places. And up to now, some of them came out later on being found in swamps. So there are so many who are even not released, we don't know where they are, and yet nobody can ask, nobody can say, where are these people? And this created fear within citizens and may affect the participation of both women and men, especially youth, who are majority of Ugandan population in future elections. Because it is important to note that citizen participation is a cornerstone of elections, given the centrality of elections in selecting their government. Civil society, I'm sure my time has gone because you gave us very little time. But I want to say that NGOs and civil society have been left to go into service delivery only. We don't question the government, and we know the same was like in Tanzania, and I can assure you there is not much difference in Kenya, because I have had opportunity to participate and observe Kenya's elections, and I know Kenya for it, tribalism at the center, ethnicity, and then NGOs go with it. Civil society organizations in Kenya, actually, Uganda have been better. Where the political go with the tribalism and what is it, and the ethnicity, that's where the civil society go. And maybe the different thing in Kenya is that for them they make alliance. Come elections, new alliances here and there. If they are making alliances, but these alliances are not promoting democratic governance at all, because the politics of tribalism and ethnicity continues to prevail in Kenya, permeating through even the civil society organization, including cases of police extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearance in Kenya. For instance, in 2019, killings were reported in 2020. And so, in fact, the overview report, the report also noted that human rights defenders in Kenya face innumerable threats from security agencies when they pursue cases of police killings and enforced disappearances. So you can see, generally, I'm in a hurry, of course, but generally in East Africa, you may say some things underlying, we cannot see, for instance, this Tanzania, which used to be under secret. I want to thank us who instituted this TEW, because we cracked the door and opened and saw all that was happening there when everybody was not seeing. And I want to believe that Tanzania is not going to hide itself anymore, because it has been pretending people, because they don't know what goes on, they've been saying things are okay. And so I want to conclude by saying that with all this downward trend of democratic governance, for sure, if we are not careful, we are going back to wherever we came from in the early 80s. So I want to say that the case of Tanzania election watch is one of the emerging solutions we saw in 2020, because it is a homegrown solution by Africans in Africa for African countries, using professional, eminent, accomplished citizens of Africa who are immune to manipulation and who can push electoral processes ahead. For me, I want to propose that we can still develop and grow and consolidate homegrown solutions and accountability mechanism for elections oversight, because those will be mechanisms coming from legitimacy, more acceptance, and more critical than foreign observers and regional observers such as AU, who are politically compromised. Therefore, my case here is to say that we need to strengthen or to rebuild and restructure properly this mechanism, because it will help us. You may say it may not work so quickly, but it is important to have distinguished people who are not assigned to a specific organization which will be banned or closed, who will be not compromised, who will not need any money, but who are driven and have the passion for Africa to go on a democratic path. I think we need to think so much on this so that our TEW will become to African W mechanism, so that we can watch these things and see how far we can go. So as I conclude, I'm saying Kenya is going on right now. I'm not so sure. I know the alliances are there, but I don't know. All these things I listed, of course, militarization, commercialization, tribalism, materialism, it will be there. And I just want to hope that we should learn from the experiences which we have had, so that they can actually do better and show an example of what better can be done. But as for us in Uganda, please, I don't know, either you pray, but prayer needs action. It says in the Bible, the book of James, that prayer without action is dead. So we must pray as Africans as we take action that will help us to get back on the road. Otherwise, we are done. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miria. Powerful insights there. You've shared with us not only the Ugandan experience, but also the East African. And one of the things, for those who didn't know, that Dr. Miria is a member of the Tanzania Election Watch Panel of Eminent Persons. So she's really had an experience in the East African region. And so I think you now understand where she comes from with all this knowledge and information, and also the ears in this space. Thank you so much, Dr. So I'll move to the next speaker. And I having read the Bible, the bio, I now understand why Dr. Miria suggested we should have started with Professor Frederick Sempembwa. He was a member of the Uganda Constitutional Commission, the Odoki Commission, which drafted the Uganda 1995 Constitution. He is a member of the committee of, he was also a member of the committee of experts which drafted the 2010 Constitution for the Republic of Kenya. He has served as a member of the Judicial Service Commission of Uganda, entrusted with the selection of judges for the courts of Uganda, and on the Law Council of the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. He has been the president of the Uganda Law Society and of East African Law Society. He has been instrumental in the formulation of the numerous laws and acts in Uganda. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Professor Frederick Sempembwa to just talk us through as well the democratic trends, the democratic trends in the East African region, and the implication or the impact of the same on the non-governmental organizations or the civil society organizations. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much. I had prepared a keynote address, but I'll not go to that because we are almost ending this webinar. I'll just make a few comments on the future of elections. We are all here because we are interested in having peace and stability in our region. And we are anxious to assist each other that through free and fair elections, democracy, which is the basis of that peace and stability, can prevail. Otherwise, all our plans for structural transformation, however lofty, will remain, if implemented, as statistical achievements without development of our people. And this is an opportune moment because the Kenya election is around next month. We've always at least been observing these elections and praying that Kenya has a peaceful election. This would have been a moment to replicate TEW, but it wasn't possible. What happened in Tanzania has been aptly described and is happening and has the potential to happen in many of our African states, definitely in this region, because we have situations where regimes have either overstayed the constitutional requirements or are anxious to retain power, and they do everything on earth to win and retain that power. This has been described as a election or capture of elections by some authors. In Uganda, we started very early. I participated in stealing elections, 61, 62, when I was a schoolboy, not by desire, but through coercion, because our school teachers took us for being registered as voters, and some of us were below the age. And on voting day, they told us where to cast the vote. Otherwise, if we didn't, God would be very, very sour on us, and we could go to hell. So we voted. But those elections, 61, 62, just before independence, were also marred by elements of intimidation. So we have a high experience in stealing elections. But since then, election capture has become sophisticated. The highest form happened in Tanzania and in Uganda. But it could be higher in some states where the regime creates a situation of terror, silent terror, and it's made quite clear that a catastrophe will happen unless the people vote for the continuation of that regime. That's the highest aspect of election capture. I would say that the responsibility for decapturing these elections remains with us, the people in the state. It is not going to be achieved solely by observing elections or by a watch TEW model, but these are supplementary efforts that can help us to galvanize our efforts, especially where they are accompanied by engagement and sensitization. And one of the forms of sensitization is to call upon the people to unite upon principles. I'm not now talking about coalitions, Kenya style, because those are coalitions for winning the vote without any transformation in society. And that can also cause election violence when people realize that every election is simply an realignment of groups within the ruling class without any change. The CSOs and the TEW model can assist in a number of ways, and much of it has been discussed before. We have not been able, I think among the weaknesses of TEW, I can see at least two, which we talked about before. A watch of this importance should start early during the election cycle. But of course, it wasn't possible to start that early. We were simply assisted by some analysis of the context of elections that emerged from studies by people on the ground. So that is a weakness I can see. The other one is working under conditions of extreme instability and intimidation was a challenge. Someone has talked about our organizational structure, praising the panel. Yes, the panel, we thank you for praising the panel, but you know that the panel was able to work from locations of security and upon the basis of data that had been collected. Our support staff, the technical teams, could be criticized, but then they had challenges. They had the challenges of working from different locations in the two states, and coordinating their efforts was quite difficult. You must realize that this was a learning experience for all of us. It hadn't been done before. These conditions of complete capture had not been met. The conditions of having to work partly off-site and partly on-site had not been tried before. Further, the collection of data was largely discrete because of the environment. Of course, this mode of work can be criticized, that it's not based on reliable data. If the environment allowed, it would have been better to have on-site people collecting data that have been identified for purposes of verifying the information or the data they have collected, but this was not possible. Then in terms of effects, which we haven't talked about, one of the weaknesses is that the TEW effectively wound up upon disseminating its report. In fact, the report was not really disseminated effectively to reach the people concerned most in Tanzania. It's another weakness. But we wound up without a follow-up. And we cannot really assess what effect the report had or has or continues to have. We need to be educated by some research that Tanzania has shifted a bit, if at all, in readjusting the election environment in accordance with the report. What has been visible to us is the apparent transformation of dialogue between the leaders or amongst the leaders. We've seen the Tanzania president talking with members of the opposition. We very much hope that Mr. Lissu will go and be part of this conversation and I'm sure he will. He had the courage, having shouldered 16 bullets, he had the courage to go back and face the potential of having more bullets pumped into his body, just to make sure that there will be a free and fair election. So my brother Tundu Lissu, I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. We hope that you will be part of this dialogue that can assist our people in Tanzania to gradually recapture the elections. But we cannot boast that this is an effect of the TW report, because as you recall, there was a change of leadership, top leadership, almost simultaneously with our publication of the report. And these changes, at least in the dialogue, could be ascribed to this change of leadership. Where we succeeded is, I think, to sensitize and to create awareness regionally and internationally of what went on in Tanzania. And I'm sure that the regime in Tanzania is aware and has studied this report. There's no regime in Africa will recognize and praise a report of this nature that appears to be criticizing whatever has happened. For the future, I think it is necessary, if we were to replicate the TEW model, it would be necessary to make some adjustments. First, in the selection of the panel, and my thoughts were, of course, this panel had a lot of knowledge and experience, and the future selection could also bring in the element of knowledge of the history, the political history of the country being watched by some members of the panel. The watch, I would praise it because it is very useful in building solidarity, galvanizing the people of the region, and coming together to fight for our freedoms. Otherwise, there's no basis for our being members of the same community. It cannot be based purely on economic objectives, because it will fail, as we can see. It hasn't gone very far. And we are making the mistakes of simply admitting in new members without proper analysis of the value addition in terms of peace and security that is based on democracy. I would say that by way of conclusion, because of time, that election observation by some of these state-sponsored or regional-sponsored, continental-sponsored organizations has lost meaning because they come and express solidarity, really. They don't want to divert from this solidarity which goes on, leadership solidarity, which goes on in spite of what is happening in the backyards of their states. And when things go wrong, when this capture continues, definitely we'll continue to see disorderly succession to government through military intervention. And our leaders who have been doing nothing under the guise of respecting internal affairs will have no moral standing to have meetings, bang the podiums in apparent indignation of the intervention, the military intervention. They have no moral standing to impose sanctions which do not really affect the military leaders, but they affect our people. So we should have this call that our leaders should also make a shift. The problem is that in most cases, they are partners in crime. And I don't know how else we can go around it. But I'd like to thank you for, first of all, I would like to thank the two civil society organizations that enabled TEW. It enabled us to have this experience. It has enabled us to start thinking in terms of an African election watch. I wish it could have materialized before the Kenya election. And I would like to thank the organizers of this webinar for continuing the dialogue. Thank you very much. I haven't talked much, but I can see that it's 14 past the time.
Thank you so much, Professor Sempembwa. We have taken note of the recommendation and even the call to action. In the interest of time, I'll welcome Ms. Daisy Amdanyi, who is the next speaker. She is a governance, development, and women rights specialist and an activist with several years of experience. Ms. Daisy is currently serving as the Executive Director of Crown Trust based here in Nairobi, Kenya. She will be sharing with us the democratic trends, looking at the Kenyan experience and her having served as the executive director and also been in the space and done a lot of elections work in the country. So we welcome you, Daisy, sorry. The next 10 minutes are yours for you to just talk us through what your thoughts and perspectives around this topic. Welcome. Daisy, please unmute.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
We can hear you.
You can hear me, Annette?
Yes, yes, please proceed.
Good, thank you. So I was saying thank you so much to the organizers, and it's been a very insightful conversation, and even the reading of the report. I really want to congratulate the TEW team and the organizations that were involved in this very unique model and approach. I think it's very, very timely. You know, I was listening to Professor Sempembwa talking and about, you know, it being timely, but we need to move it faster. It actually needs to move faster because already the leaders within the East African region are talking about a political federation. And so this kind of model and design and approach to elections monitoring is very timely. It's unfortunate that it was not considered viable, or it wasn't considered for the Kenyan elections, because while so many countries in Africa benchmark their democratic standards on Kenya, we find that as Kenya, we are backsliding. Despite a new and very progressive constitution, we have seen the similar elements to those countries that are completely captured and find themselves in a shrinking democratic space. We've seen what has happened. Tundu Lissu talked about representation and how electoral units are used to gerrymander and give unfair advantage. And we've seen that the attempt at that happening, you know, here in Kenya, particularly with the BBI, where 70 constituencies were arbitrarily drawn, but clearly with the intent to skew electoral outcomes in a certain direction. So I think that this kind of approach is really important, first of all, in being able to set the democratic ideals for ourselves as a region, because whether we like it or not, the East African region, we are already federated. And therefore, the practices that we see happening in other countries are likely to be replicated in partner states if there is no given pushback. I found myself wondering whether if a TEW model was in effect for the 2017 general elections, if perhaps maybe we would have had a minority report of different observer mission that actually represents the interests of the people, because this kind of a model actually is the voice of the people. And while we have domestic observation models, I mean, we have domestic observation coalitions, but regional ones, like the ones, we have the EU coming, AU and all that. So it is important that we begin to look at this model, this approach, as being able to validate the voices of the people, the local people, because like for our 2017 general election, which was nullified by the courts, the observer missions that came actually gave a clean bill of health to the elections, and up until the time that the elections were nullified. And of course, there was embarrassment all around. And so being able to tell the story of the local people, the challenges that are faced, and not just looking at the elections as an event, but as a process, means that we need to look end to end, what is happening, the kind of militarization that Honorable Miriam Matembe was talking about. And of course, Honorable Matembe, you'll be perhaps disappointed to find that in Kenya, we are beginning to see these kind of elements, seeking to emerge. And we hope that even as we go to our elections in the next 26, is it 26 or 25 days, that we will not have to live out the horror of what we have seen in our neighboring countries, where the police and the military are used to oppress the voice of the people and bring out an electoral outcome that suits the state captors. For the most part, I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is that our politicians are politician businessmen as opposed to politician leaders. And Honorable Matembe talked about it with regards to issues of the monetization of the elections and the campaigns. And in Kenya, I think it is Wachira Maina who said that Kenyan elections are the most expensive. They are the worst and the most expensive in the world. And we also see that aside from the expense to the taxpayer, is also the cost of elections in Kenya, which is so prohibitive. And of course, when we talk about it, especially from the perspective of women, it has the effect of curtailing the full participation of particularly women, youth, and persons with disability. So looking at elections, not just even the observer perspective, but as the expression of the will of the people. I think that it's important that even as we look at monitoring elections, that this kind of model that TEW used should actually be adopted, but like to be a long-term process, long-term observer missions that look at the planning process, including how laws are either put in place or amended to skew the electoral process against the true manifestation of the will of the people, or even to suppress the participation of certain groups or the emergence of certain groups of people through the monetization of elections in Kenya. That's been a problem. We enacted the Campaign Financing Act, which looks to moderate the amounts of money spent in campaigns and elections, and also to ensure transparency and openness in sources of funding to date, that piece of legislation has never been implemented. And so it also drives corruption, because it allows for illicit sources of funding to, influence elections. But of course, it allows for corruption, misuse of public resources, misuse of public office. We are seeing it right now a lot in our Kenyan elections, where we have cabinet secretaries who ideally are not supposed to be political or lean towards any political side, openly campaigning for one side, one coalition, and championing that, and even saying how they are working to ensure that that side wins. And where our hands are almost tied. And so it would be good if we have voices from the region. So I really want to appreciate this discussion. I want to appreciate this model of observation and encourage that. I think this needs to be more permanent. I was thinking we should have something like an East African Elections Watch, and begin to rely on our voices, the voices of people who can give a true account of the electoral outcome. The use of technology is also really good. I mean, I like the idea that people were able to observe from different parts. We've seen how technology has become a major influence in the political space. And I particularly like how technology is useful, especially the social media space, because it is one space that these autocratic or dictator-leaning leaders are not able to control. So it becomes a very useful space to really get the authentic voice of the people. That's why they opt for internet shutdowns, because that's the only way that they can shut the voices of the people. So imagine if the internet is shut down in Kenya, but at least Uganda, Tanzania, we have still voices going on, and of course through VPNs and everything, the voices of Kenyans can still be heard. So being able to use technology to bypass some of the barriers that are put in place, I think that is really something that we should look to. And if it's not too late, I do believe that there are some elements that can actually be put in place to support, us in our forthcoming elections. And I know that Angaza and KHRC and the partners are really looking at how to harness the power of technology. So I'm not going to say much more other than to really just thank you for this opportunity, to wish ourselves in Kenya and a successful and peaceful election at the very, very least, and hope that you will be looking out for us from wherever you are and looking to see how we're doing in Kenya. Wish us well. But in future, I think that we should look at forthcoming elections and begin to prepare to this as a major intervention, starting with the region in East Africa. And our region has gone wider, so it is very necessary. And for Africa, as has been suggested by others. So thank you so much, and congratulations to the team. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daisy, and the rest of our speakers for giving us very insightful issues that we want to take away from this conversation today, to also kindly just beef our responses moving forward for the East African region. Perhaps before we even close, I think I saw the presence of George Kigoro in the team, maybe just to allow him to say hi to us. He was part and really involved in implementing of this project. Perhaps just he can say hi, then we continue with the next level of closer.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I don't know where my camera is, but I think in the interest of time, let me just say thank you very much. It's an interesting conversation, and congratulations to Kenya Human Rights Commissioner and your partners. Congratulations to And thank you very much for the panel of eminent persons that have helped in shaping this space into what it has become. Of course, I've also seen your partner, Kituo cha Katiba. Thank you very much for the support that you've all provided that has created this space in the way it has. And originally, of course, there was also the Center for Strategic Litigation, but also the speakers today, all of them or most of them original members of the panel that supported this work. The massive courage of the Honorable Tundu Lissu is a source of inspiration for everybody, but also the courage of the panel, because the panel members are very eminent and very outspoken people on a difficult subject in our region. And all I can wish and hope is that we continue speaking truth to power and speaking as boldly as we do, because without doing so, we cannot have any hope of changing the region. Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the effort that we are all involved in.
Thank you very much, George, for that. I know you are very much involved, plus your team that helped this happen. Two happened because OSF came boldly to support us. So we thank you for that major support that you gave to the TU project. And also we hope that you continue supporting this kind of projects moving forward, because solidarity in East Africa is very, very needed. As we come to the closure, I'm sure that I've not locked out anyone. I've not seen any chats from our inboxes or our Twitter. So I hope I've not locked out anyone and an issue, but in case you have any issues, please raise with us. We are happy to support and even just answer back in the event there is need to answer. In the closure is to appreciate everyone who've been involved in this. Importantly is our consultant, Professor Collins Odote, who was giving us the insights of what our project evaluation report would look like. And one of the things that we need to take away from this meeting today is the missed opportunities that probably would inform what we want or what we are currently doing, especially for Kenya, and looking at the underutility of the technology, which is what has come very largely as one of the used tool for advancing electoral fairness and credibility. So it's one of the things that we'll be very, very keen to look out and to make sure that we have learned from our previous Tanzania and also Uganda elections. So thank you very much, Professor. We look forward to getting the report very soon. And also to appreciate our speakers, Honorable Tundu Lissu, Honorable Honorable Miriam Matembe, Professor Sipembo, and Ms. Daisy Amdanyi. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for being part of this conversation. It was important that we have those perspectives and to even know whether this project is still important from our speakers and also beneficiaries of the project. That was very, very helpful, and we have hope that indeed we did a good job amid the challenges that we passed or we experienced, but most importantly that the impact was felt. I also want to thank the organizations behind this project, KCK, Ms. Edith Kibalama, and also Davis Malombe, the Director of Kenya Human Rights Commission. Thank you very much for the opportunity to also just be part of the project and to beef up solidarity for the Tanzanians and also for the Ugandans during their time that they needed us most. We continue asking or requesting that the partners also and brothers from the other side also give solidarity to Kenya so that we kind of look at what is happening in East Africa. It is important to have that comparatives of how do we approach Tanzania election, or any East African election has to have a perspective of all East African countries. So it is important that we also get to know from Ugandans and also Tanzanians, what were you able to observe in Kenya and what can we carry to an East African regional projects like what we had with TUNE. So thank you very much, everyone. Our able MC here, Madam Annette, thank you for helping and taking us through the day and also just the conversation. It was important, and we have already given the successes that we have seen and the project implementation that we have done. We can now confidently say that we will have a sit down and see how best we can restructure or mold the TUNE model to be an East African model, and even Africa at large. We start with the East Africa. Without saying much, and also because time has gone, I want to say thank you very much, and we close at that point. Thank you.